Welcome everyone to this second webinar. It's the second in a series of 3 where we're looking at the skills carers develop, which you might be able to bring into the workplace should you already be working, should you be thinking of returning to work because your caring circumstances have changed in any way, because we know it's a huge decision. So hopefully this series of workshop will help you to perhaps develop a bit of confidence and to explore whether this is something for you or not. Last week, we looked at the skills and experiences you develop as a carer that we know employers are looking for, and those skills that they invest time training their staff members in, but we know very well that you develop them as carers. So in this second session, I'm delighted to say we're going to be joined by Nathan and Lucy, who are going to tell us their own personal stories of being carers, the skills they've developed and honed, many skills they already had, but have been honed even more by being a family carer for somebody with dementia. And just to sort of give their story, and hopefully that will resonate with people and give you something to think about. These webinars have been possible due to a grant that was awarded to us by the Dementia Services Development Trust. So a big shout out and thank you to them, because it was with that funding that we've been able to do this. We hope you do enjoy the session. As I say, it is being recorded. If you could keep yourself on mute and with your cameras off whilst Nathan and Lucy tell us their stories, then that would be fantastic. And then after about 20 minutes, we're going to go into breakout rooms. You don't have to contribute if you don't want to, but it's so helpful to everyone if everyone can sort of give their own thoughts and opinions and their own experiences, because it really helps other people. I'm sure you'll find listening to Lucy and Nathan that helps. So sharing your story as well, that just doubles, triples everyone's experience, which is fantastic. There'll be really small groups. And a big shout out to all the staff at Dementia Carers Count who we've cajoled and convinced that they really want to do this, and they're going to come in and facilitate those breakout rooms for us. You'll spend about 10-15 minutes in the breakout rooms and they'll help to form the discussions. And then we'll come back as a big group, and those facilitators will feed back to us all what was discussed confidentially, obviously, but what was discussed in those breakout rooms. So there's no fear around you having to feed back to a larger group. That will be done by the facilitators. And again, thank you to those staff for doing that for us. So the 2 speakers that we have today is I'm going to be joined by Nathan. Nathan is our community fundraiser officer at Dementia Carers Count. I'm having to read it now because there's a long list of things these 2 people do. But he is our community fundraising officer at Dementia Carers Count. He's a coach and mentor to the caring profession, an Anglican clergyman and a canon of Bangor Cathedral, and actually until recently the honorary chaplain for schools specialising in supporting children with autism. And then we have Lucy, who I'm sure will give you some of the exciting background to her previous work experiences, and she is now the CEO of the Good Company People, which is an organisation that she's recently formed in 2020 whilst caring for a family member, and is aimed at helping over 65s enjoy more independent, fulfilling lives for longer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass over to Nathan first, so he can tell us his story for about 10 minutes and how his experiences help him in the workplace. And then Lucy will have about 10 minutes before we round up and go into the breakout rooms. So without further ado, I will put myself on mute and turn off my camera and hand over to Nathan. Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks. Just to check, can you all hear me?
Yes, I can, Nathan.
You can. That's good. Brilliant. I was going to say it's nice to see you all, but I can't really see anybody. I can just see names, but I know you're all out there in the ether. So I hope my short story, or the story of me and my mother, is helpful and brings up some questions about going back into the workplace. So it's a good place to start is to say that my mother started behaving differently, let's say that. She lives in Yorkshire, and at the time we lived in Oxford, so we only got to see her on visits. And she started to forget things, particularly how to get on and how to get off trains. Sounds a strange thing, but she couldn't work out how to go down the steps and to get onto the platform, minding the gap. She'd lose track of time, and very often she'd end up somewhere different, and we couldn't always find her, which was quite frightening. And we'd had calls from friends and neighbours who were helping her with shopping, and several who said that she wasn't really eating. Although when we saw her, she could cook, you know, a 3-course meal, and the house was pristine, and she was always very well turned out. Something just didn't feel right, and our instincts told us that she wasn't well. She managed to hide it, I think, for probably quite a long time. But after we had to sell the house to pay for nursing home fees, we found her diaries, which was a very sad thing to find, because she was worried that she was ill and she didn't know who to turn to. And she wanted to go and find her sister who had died several years earlier, but she'd forgotten. She just wanted to be with my aunt. She'd even got an old bus pass out that hadn't worked for about 20 years to go on a bus to try and find her. On one summer's evening, she called me to say that there was an intruder in her home. Very frightening, and frightening for us as well. And so naturally, we called the police, but there was no sign of anybody or indeed a break-in. She then started regularly to pack her clothes, going to see her neighbours, insisting that they'd asked her to stay the night. And she'd call us at all hours. And then one day she called saying that she'd fallen, and we never got to the bottom of what actually happened, but it was like flicking a light switch. And from that day onwards, she was in hospital and then a nursing home, and she has stayed in care to this day. That was almost 10 years ago. I think what I've learned through caring for her, trying to find her the right nursing home, trying to navigate the last 10 years, it's sometimes been painful, but also extremely valuable, not just for me, but for other people. And I've learned all sorts of skills and levels of resilience and patience, which I never knew I had or would be capable of. So many of them are transferable and usable in the workplace, especially if you spent some time out to care. And some of these insights might resonate with others and with Lucy and all of you tuning in today. One obvious thing, but is worth saying, is that I've learned a lot of patience and also perseverance. And it's actually really hard, especially for an impatient person like me, who likes life to be in tidy boxes, because that's how I think my mind should work. It doesn't, but that's one of my greatest wishes. Learning to juggle all sorts of aspects of care, from personal care to housing to finances to therapeutic, all against a backdrop of deadlines, external agencies, and also the worsening health of my mother. A personal example would be when we were not happy with the care at my mum's first home. We had to really fight, and I use that word on purpose, really had to push social workers, staff and doctors to support her in the ways that she needed. And it took a lot of time and required a lot of patience. And it's then when I discovered mindfulness as a way of coping with what was happening. And if you don't practice mindfulness, I'd encourage everybody at least to Google it and to see if it's something you're interested in. And so in work, often things are complicated and nuanced. Persevering with a project, getting all sorts of people on board and gathering colleagues together around a complex project is an important and sought after skill. And it's something that we learn as carers. Problem solving, dealing with difficult people. We might not like to admit it, but we all have to do that on a daily basis. Multitasking, juggling, resilience and patience are all at the heart of being successful in the workplace and also as a carer. Second thing I was thinking about kind of is summed up by the word acceptance, not just acceptance of me and my limitations, but accepting that we work with individuals, with lots of people who we have to meet where they are, and we need to form true relationships and dialogue with others. Accepting that we're all diverse in ways perhaps that we might not like, and working with people who need support in all sorts of ways. And an example would be when we were looking at moving my mother closer to us from Yorkshire down to Oxfordshire. Even though she didn't officially have capacity, she was still able to make choices and be part of the decision-making process. And actually, she didn't want to move near us, which I thought was a bit rude at the time, but she wanted to stay in Yorkshire because that's where her heart is, and she knew where she was, and she could make a decision. So that's exactly what happened, accepting that we don't always know what is best for others, but it's actually part of an ongoing process. Figuring out what a person's capabilities are on the ground, not just on paper. And the easiest route is not always the best route. And it's really hard to be fully accepting and inclusive, but that's what we're all trying to be in workplaces across the country, of course. And one needs to be in deep relationship with the people that we work with, something that's very hard post-COVID, if we can use that phrase, when we're all working remotely, or certainly I am, but it is possible and it is valuable. And finally, something that gets me through in all sorts of ways is humour. And it sounds, I don't know, rather flippant or even a bit ridiculous to say this, especially in the context of caring. But caring for my mum has given me a whole other perspective on coping through humour. And sometimes it's the only thing that's got me through. Seeing the ridiculous circumstances we are put in sometimes as carers, the juggling of life, older parents, kids, jobs, mortgages, never mind trying to be with a partner or having a life. It sometimes feels impossible and frustrating, and sometimes really depressing. We can be scared to laugh at ourselves or the situation that we find ourselves in, and it can feel disrespectful to the person we're caring for, but it can also be a release in the right way. And humour, I think, is really important in the workplace, and without it, work can certainly seem like a drag, and the light and the joy goes out of it. Seeing the funny side of life is infectious and can change not only your day, but the day of those around you. And just to close with, as somebody once put it, there are only 4 kinds of people in the world, and this is good to remember. Those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. And so we're all in this together.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Apologies, the spotlight wasn't on you until a little bit in my technical glitches, I'm afraid. So they probably had a big picture just saying my name, but we got it sorted in the end. So you'll stay on spotlight in a minute, and then we'll change the spotlight to Lucy. Thank you so much. It was so helpful to hear your story and those 3 key areas really around patience, acceptance and humour as well. And I just really liked sort of how you talked about having to negotiate and meet somebody where they are as well. And I think with your mum, with that move from Yorkshire, she may not have had full capacity, but it just showed how actually in the workplace as well as caring, to meet someone and to try and allow someone to make the best of what they do have and to contribute and to be part of planning is just such an important skill.
I think it's really empowering, isn't it? And she did feel part of that process, and it was the right decision to make, I think, in the end. Mm-hmm. Either that or she just didn't want the grandchildren coming to see her, I don't know.
Yeah. Sure it wasn't that. And then actually there's us giggling, you said humour, and I know before we did this you were talking there's a fine balance, isn't there, because sometimes to talk about having a laugh is difficult when you're caring, but you do have to. Humour's incredibly important, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. And there are ways of, ways of finding the funny side, whether it's when you're on your own and you can lock the bathroom door and, shout or cry or laugh or whatever. There's got to be an outlet. And I think sometimes, ridiculous is the word. You sit back and think, how am I expected to do all this? The expectation very much is on yourself, I think, some of the time. But it's if you take it all in one chunk, it is ridiculous, and that's where you need to break it down and make sure that you've got that backup and those people who can, the people who've got your back, really, who can support you, I think.
And definitely that chunking, a big skill to take into the workplace. I often feel overwhelmed in work, but that skill of chunking and thinking one step at a time is really important. Thank you. So we're going to put the spotlight on Lucy now. I don't mean that sort of Lucy, you're in the spotlight, but so that you're the main person on the screen for people to see. And I'll turn my camera off in a minute. So thank you, Lucy, for joining us as well. As I said, you're the CEO of the Good Company People, which you formed in 2020 whilst being a carer. But I know there's lots of other backgrounds you might want to share with us as well. But if you could tell us your story as well, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. My God, that last statement that you made, Nathan, which really, really drives home just how we are all in this together, aren't we? It's so true. So my story is that I graduated university and went into television, and I was producing lots of reality TV shows, like Hell's Kitchen and Love Island and Big Brother. And that was my 20s, which I had a ball. But I always had this yearning inside of me I got into TV because I really wanted to make a change, and I ended up being the voice of Big Brother. So it was a bit incongruous. So when I wasn't making television, I used to borrow the video equipment of the TV company I worked for. And I went out to East Africa and covered famines, and I worked in orphanages, and then I came back and made television. And then in my 30s, I just realized that actually I saw a problem with thousands of children in orphanages. And I thought that, maybe I could set up an organization and to help the situation, because I wanted every child to grow up in a loving family. So I quit my TV career and went out to Uganda after raising money. And eventually a team of us, we worked together with the government of Uganda to work in care reform and system change. And ultimately, all the children that are in orphanages, we were placing them either back into their families or into adoptive families. So every child grew up in a safe and loving home. Then during my time when I was working in Africa, my mum, who is my hero, she was the person who helped me set up Child's Eye and did all my fundraising. And yeah, my hero. Anyway, we went to, she really helped me, and she got a Parkinson's disease, and then she got diagnosed with dementia, Parkinson's disease dementia, which was pretty terrible. And I realized that seeing into the future, she'd need much more of my help. So I handed over my project and came back home and moved opposite my mum and dad with my wife. Now that was a massive change, and now my mom lives with me and my wife opposite, and we are her carers. And so when my mum was diagnosed, being someone who was very curious, I wanted to know what would the future held, so I went and spoke to carers, and I was like, your mum or dad is living with dementia. What's it like? And what was described to me was the analogy of it's like a slow motion train wreck. And I was like, oh God. And again and again, people were saying, you know, it's a really tough. So that's why being an entrepreneur, I thought, right, well, how can we change the situation? And so set up the Good Company People, which was all about supporting carers and people living with dementia. And I always say that there's the phrase, which is necessity is the mother of all invention. And that's why Good Company was born. I ultimately blame my mother. Anyway, so what have I learned being a social entrepreneur and being a carer? Well, how I could, I think the first thing that I've really learned is adaptability. My mum has an aggressive form of the disease, and every day we have to adapt. Just when we think we've got everything right and her care package sorted, the disease gets worse, and we're constantly pivoting and responding to her needs. And you know, and so incrementally you've just got to adapt. And I think that is very translatable into a startup or working in a startup environment, because you're constantly refining your model. What you're doing is you're testing, you're seeing if it works, you're evaluating it, you're reiterating it, and you're learning. And I think that's what you're constantly doing as a carer, aren't you? You're constantly learning and constantly thinking, is that right for my mum, or is that right for my father? And, you know, and how can I do it better? And so having that curiosity and having that just real sense of, you know, fight. I think that's a good word, exactly what Nathan said. Is really important and very translatable from being a carer to being, you know, a founder of a startup. The next skill I've learned as a carer would be project management. If you think about all the things that you are juggling on your plate as a carer, you are juggling finances, benefits, making sure that your parents or, you know, your partner is taking their meds on time. And let's not even talk about getting the meds down their throats, because that's also a tricky thing for my mum as well at the moment. We've discovered putting the medicine in the banana, which has been a top tip lately, and that's really worked. There's also the health appointments, the OTs, the Parkinson's nurse, and constantly trying to curate a program of events so she is cognitively still stimulated and physically still going out to maintain her life, you know, and have as much fun as possible with her, and just try and enjoy the ride. And that's very similar to startups. When you are setting something up, you are constantly project management. You've got finances and cash flows. You've got fundraising. Where are you getting the money? How are you going to get the benefits? HR, people, you know. My mother is the toughest negotiator in the world. Having worked with my mum, I think that makes me a lot better as a boss. I'd also talk about the whole monitoring and evaluation of the project and seeing, is that the right thing for my mum? Governance, marketing, PR, safeguarding, is she okay? So I think all of that is very translatable into the workplace. I'd also say resilience, never giving up, which, you know, as a carer, it's really tough. When you're broken, when you haven't had sleep at night, you know, it's the strain that you have on your relationships. It's really tough. And I'd say it's just as tough starting and founding a social, you know, a charity, which is what I'm doing as well, because, you know, you can't give up. You know, if you are setting up an organization to support others, you've got limited resources. We're about to go into a recession. It's really tough. But if you make your why big enough, then you'll achieve it. Is always my advice. It sounds like Nathan is much better at self-care than I am. I am terrible. I haven't figured it out yet. I am a workaholic, and when I'm not looking after my mum, I am at my computer working. And I think that seeing the injustice of all the people that we work with, it's my driver, and I just will not give up until the situation is changed. But I do need to, you know, practice and enhance my self-care. And I didn't have this, but Nathan brought up humor, and it and so just a little anecdote of me and my mother yesterday, as I was showering my mum. She didn't get the irony of this when she said, you know what, I think you should have a baby because I want to look after a baby. And I was like, as someone who right now is, you know, we're not going to have children. We look after mum morning and afternoon, and, you know, and so therefore there isn't room for children in our lives. But the irony was not lost on me that my mum wanted to look after a baby. So, you know, talking about humor and, you know, and you know, and in the workplace, if it's not fun, if it's not enjoyable, you won't do it. And so therefore it is, you've got to see the humor, not just when you're caring, but also when you are, you know, when you're trying to create a solution, you've got to make it fun.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That was fantastic. Like Nathan, both of you, really incredible. I think that, you know, the take homes there, that huge thought around, it's a whole project management, you know, from the governance, the physical, juggling appointments, doing all sorts of monitoring and marketing and evaluation, but also that sense of determination and fight that you can't give up, and that you can translate that into the workplace when you're coming across things that, and you talked about startup, but I think also if you're going into any sort of workplace, that idea that you are refining what you do, you're testing what you do, and you're evaluating what you're doing new iterations, and you're always learning. Such an important thing. So thank you. Just to say, I'm just going to give a shout out right now because you mentioned medication in a banana. That needs to be discussed with the GP for anybody who's listening to this webinar, because it is covert medication. But we do have a lunch and listen on Thursday afternoon, actually at 12:30, and that's around the management of medication with two of our practitioners. So it will come up there as well. So
I don't hide it. I say I'm putting it in a banana and she can eat it rather than swallow, just to qualify. But I will be coming to your lunch and learn, because I'm always need to learn.
So thank you. So I'll promote that again at the end of the webinar, and we can put the links in it to for listeners if they wish to do so. So it was a great reminder for me, so thank you, Lucy. So there's been lots of things talked about there: humour, adaptability, inclusion for people, and particularly in decision making, determination, project management. So many lovely things in both of those cases, and what wonderful storytelling you gave us as well. So thank you very much. We're going to go into the breakout rooms now, and there will be 4 or 5 people in those breakout rooms. That's the point at which, if you would like to turn your cameras on and take yourself off mute, then that's really helpful for us facilitators to be able to have a discussion in a small group situation. We've got a couple of questions that we're going to pose to those groups, and the facilitators will remind you of them once we get in there. But when you were they're about when you're listening to Lucy and Nathan, what resonated with you? Were there skills that you see that you have that you now feel would transfer into the workplace? And are there any other things that you particularly feel that you're developing as a carer, either that you didn't have before you were caring, or that you did have from your previous employment, but you just feel has just developed and developed and developed as you've been through sort of caring for somebody else, that you could then promote and explain to employers? I think Nathan and Lucy did a tremendous job of explaining to us what those skills are, and if only we could explain it in that sort of eloquent way to carers, to employers, sorry, that would be really helpful as well. So you won't really need to do anything, all by magic, thankfully by Rob, who's in our team. He's going to put you into breakout rooms now. You'll just have a button to press on your screen to say OK, and it will send you to a breakout room where you'll meet one of our DCC staff, or maybe 2 of our DCC staff. So thanks, Rob. Hello everyone, as you're coming back into the room, welcome back. Well done, Rob, executed the breakout rooms brilliantly again, and got us there, although I think we had one person who was mid-conversation in one room and got pulled into my room, but I think I've done all the apologies for that. Can I remind yourself just to put yourself on mute and turn your cameras off again unless you're one of the facilitators of the breakout room. I hope it was useful to you, and I hope it was useful for Lucy and Nathan. Definitely when Nathan joined us, we had some golden nuggets. So including myself, Kate, I'm going to charge you with not allowing me to forget myself in doing the feedback, but I'm going to go to our facilitators and ask if they could just, you've got 2 minutes. Helen Piper, I'm giving you a warning. You will have 2 minutes to give your feedback in. So I'm going to start with Kate. Kate, would you like to give us the feedback from your group?
Yes, thanks, Sue. So yeah, we kind of answered both the questions together, but we were talking about some of the skills where things like that adaptability and changing all the time and how the situation changes all the time, but also about transferring what you've learned in one situation into another. So for example, if you've picked up a technique or something that works in one area, remembering that that actually might work in a different area as well. We talked a lot about the sort of need to push and advocate, and also about how emotions are so much more involved when or it kind of drives you when you're close to the person that you're caring for. It kind of gives you a bit more of a push to push things, but also equally makes it a bit more difficult because you're probably a little bit more emotionally involved in the discussions. And so some of it's about learning how to manage that, which is a good skill to then when you go into a work situation and you have to manage difficult situations. And then just other things generally about remembering mindfulness and pausing and allowing yourself to, again, back to that managing situation. And for one of our coaches, they're talking about some of the things that they've learned in their current job, which is helpful in their caring role. So it's that skills going both ways. So learning things as a carer, but equally applying things from how you work in situations. And so one of those things was about interpreting non-verbal communication and skills around that. So skills going across both ways really, but yeah, everybody very positive about what they learned from Lucy and Nathan. So thank you, Lucy and Nathan.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, definitely transferable both ways. We had that discussion in our group as well, and I'll come on to that in a short while. Kirsty, can I come to your group next? That be okay?
It certainly is. So I'm trying to spotlight myself at the same time as talk to you. So we had a small group, but Lucy joined our group, so that was really lovely. We talked a lot about humour. That seemed to be the main point for us initially, and trying to find the funny from both sides, for the person with dementia and for yourself as well. And it's not easy, and I think we came to that conclusion. It really isn't easy when you're totally frazzled. The rest of it really was just talking about juggling, like just how very difficult that is. And we had one carer in our group who is juggling caring for 2 people with different conditions. So really that's like several full-time jobs. So we were trying to look at how actually it might be quite a breeze going back into the workplace when you just have the one full-time job. And comparing again some of the skills that are taken from the workplace into the caring role as well as the other way around. So, and again, I think much appreciation for Lucy and Nathan for sharing their stories as well, so articulately.
Thank you, Kirsty. Helen and Claire, I think you facilitated together, is that right? So if I can come to one of you, that's going to cause Kirsty a challenge. Which one to pin? There we are, Helen.
Only because I was speediest, but Claire, please do jump in, because obviously Claire was sort of the main lead on this, and I was just chatting as well and joining in the group. So a couple of things that really came through to me was, again, the humour, but also what came with that was the need to roll with it, so adapting and trying to stay positive. We talked about sort of the skill sharing, so the idea that actually you're bringing skills that you've already developed in the workplace to your caring responsibilities, but actually to what extent then you're learning brand new skills, or are you strengthening the skills that you already have? And then there was sorry, just looking at my notes, yeah, there was something as well about sort of new vulnerabilities. So if you're representing yourself in the workforce, you might have had things that, you know, worried you before. You might have been more confident, but then you're slightly different now, and there's different things. And so you might think you're more resilient and confident in some ways, but then other things might knock you sideways that hadn't before. So it's about kind of understanding yourself a little bit more as well in that new sort of way. Claire, I don't know if that's everything, but sorry if I...
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a little bit about sort of finding the time for self-care and how important that was, and that's maybe sort of one of the hardest things, because you're sort of driven as a carer to solve more problems, and that sort of heightens the problem solving that you need to do. So finding time amidst all of that to actually look after yourself, you know, that was something that came up as well.
Thanks both, thank you very much. And Kirsty has come back in with a message to me to say that the other thing she'd meant to mention was the emphasis on how important it is to have support groups for making us feel normal, and that we are in this together as well. And I think something you've said there around knowing your triggers and what emotion, you know, and talking to employers maybe about, you know, what might that trigger be, or having a support group. Also that time for self-care that Claire, you've just mentioned, are things that we're going to pick up in webinar 3 next week. And I'll give you some more details about that in a moment, but that's around self-care and emotional support that you might require if you're thinking about employing but also going back into employment, but also when you're in employment. And it certainly came up in our group as well. And I'll come on to that because it was one of the latter points in our group. So I'll come back to that in a minute. So for our group, we had a really useful discussion, and thank you everyone, because it also put a different perspective for me on things as well. We're all learning all the time, aren't we? And it was really helpful. I think there was a huge resonance with what Lucy was saying around the project management, that physical, mental health, the juggling, the governance, the marketing, the safeguarding, the monitoring, the evaluating, the learning, the reiteration, all of that project management stuff. That's not a very good word, is it? But and being a director of things. And one of the things that our group talked about was actually, if you're doing that all the time when you are at home, you maybe actually don't want it from the workplace that you're going to go into. Actually, it might be something you want to leave at home. You do it all day long, you know, when you're caring. I don't want to do it in the workplace. And I would signpost people to our YouTube channel, where we had a discussion with Dawn Newey and Dr. Jemima Fitzgerald the other week, who talked about knowing what you want from your employment is really, really important, because I think the two link together. And then also with the webinar that we have next week. So it was a case, I've got these skills now, but maybe actually I don't want to employ them in the workplace, which is a really important thing to consider. We talked about feeling that you learn to nurture, to be soft, those soft skills. You learn to look after people, to nurture them, and sometimes you're thought of as the mummy for the newbies. And that can be a great skill to have, to nurturing skills. If you never had patients before, it's a development that you've created, but it comes with a cautionary tale. Because are you then in the workplace likely to swamp and mother and nurture someone so much that they don't have their own development and their own learning? So I think it was a really useful conversation to say these are brilliant skills that we get, but actually also being able to critically evaluate when those should be deployed and when maybe they shouldn't be was something. Another one was around the structured project management, that spinning plates idea, that you're constantly spinning plates. And that particular person thanked Nathan actually for reminding us about the use of mindfulness for self-care, which did lead us on to the case, if you're going back into workplace, you're commuting, you're caring as soon as you get home, where on earth can you do things like mindfulness, which generally are thought of to take a long time? And I've spoken with Dr. Jemima Fitzgerald, who's going to lead our session next week. And I know she's going to come with huge amounts of valuable tips around how you can take some mindfulness practice into just short snippets of looking after yourself, because, you know, we have to make it realistic and we have to make it practical. So people were talking very much about, they acknowledged all the skills. There was the cautionary tales about knowing your limits, knowing your boundaries, and knowing and then learning and developing it more when you get into the workplace as well. So I think that was the discussion in our group, but clearly transferable skills throughout both. I'm going to quickly hand back to Lucy and Nathan to see if they have any thoughts before I just round up this session with signposting to what we have coming up. Nathan, Lucy, is there anything you'd like to add, having listened to what came back out of those rooms?
I think I got quite caught up on the imagery from Lucy of the sort of train that you can't get off, this kind of hurtling, you know, journey. And how do you slow down the train, or how do you stop the train? You know, at the moments where you can step off at a platform, breathe, get back on again, that kind of thing. So yeah, again, all about the support that you know that we need. But the groups that I was in, I was just really impressed with just how open the questions were, and I just think it's a great forum for people who are going back into work or searching for answers as much as anybody can answer these questions. But yeah, just to say thank you to Lucy for that imagery, however frightening that imagery is.
Thanks,
Gave me
Nathan.
my why. Yeah, no, it's been, yeah, it's always such a tonic. I know, because we're all in this together, and it is a tonic spending time with other carers as well, because you get your power from other people, and you know what we're experiencing every day. It's just, it's so similar. It's scarily similar. I think something that I have you know, taken is that, as you know, the caring profession per se is you know, going to a skills for care, there's a massive shortage of incredible carers. And one thing that, you know, we're trying to do as Good Company is identify people who have had that caring experience and building it into a paid profession afterwards. So instead of going back into what you did do, actually doubling down on everything that you've learned to be able to support other people, which I think is also quite a cyclical way of doing it. So so I don't think it's necessarily going back to what you did do, but taking all the skills that you've learned and being able to do something that will really make a difference to others potentially. So just thank you. It's been enlightening as always, and thank you for all the support for Dementia Carers Counts. It's you know, you're an incredible knowledge partner, and this has been a fantastic webinar, and really enjoyed listening to people and learning so much.
Well, thank you both. I think we've learned masses from both of you, so it really is appreciated. Along with, we really appreciate the work from the other members of the team at Dementia Carers Count for facilitating the breakout rooms. Really, thank you so much, and I hope those people have enjoyed it as well. And also thank you to the Dementia Services Development Trust, whose grant has allowed us to do these webinars, along with some follow-up work that we'll be doing over the next 6 months with this. We have the third in the series next, what day are we on today? Tuesday. So 22nd of November, same time, 1:30. And that one will be the emotional support. So emotional support should you choose to go back to the workplace, but also if you're thinking about it, what might be stopping you? What might help you? What sort of things might you want to think about that help you to develop the confidence to move forwards with it? So, and that's with Dr. Jemima Fitzgerald, and we were hoping to have Dawn Newey, who did the Facebook Live with Jemima the other week and is on the YouTube channel. Unfortunately, Dawn can't make it, but we have some recordings. So I'm going to do some interviewing with Jemima, and Dawn will be joining us from a recording because unfortunately she can't join us. And so that's next week at 1:30. Do join us. We've also got a Facebook Live, as I mentioned earlier, this Thursday at 12:30. And that's with two of our practitioners, Lorraine Haining, who is a nurse, and Kate Legg, who is an occupational therapist. You may have been in the room with her, in the breakout room with her then. And they will be talking about medication and management of medication for people with dementia. So do join us for that. Remember, we've got the Virtual Carers Centre, we have our live online events, and do get in touch with us if there's anything else that you'd like. We're going to put a Zoom poll up now, just briefly. I know I'm 1 minute over, but if you have the opportunity, if you can, please could you just take the opportunity to fill in this Zoom poll. I'll be quiet so that you can concentrate on it. I'll turn my camera off and thank you, and then feel free to leave once you've done your poll. Thank you so much, everyone. Look forward to seeing you next week.